Hey homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. Thanks for joining me in my raised bed garden. This is the early September, actually technically end of August, early September garden tour. And I break these up into two parts. And so this is the raised bed garden portion. Yeah, let's see what's happening in early September. So I'm out here on the north side of this bed. And basically this is the part of the year where you just kind of give up and everything is total chaos. And so there's a lot of that happening. We had a 99-degree day on Monday. Today is Wednesday and we're expecting a high in the mid-70s. And so we've had a drastic change in temperature and it's supposed to stay lower for the rest of the week and into next week. So we are definitely moving into fall and you can feel it in the air. And so this bed is eggplant and sweet peppers. I've picked most of the Carmen. Carmen is a type of sweet pepper that is what's called a bullhorn style. And so instead of being blocky like a bell pepper, they're long and skinny. And this, I like them, one, because this is the sweetest pepper that I've ever eaten. I absolutely love it. But also because it doesn't have these big wide shoulders, it doesn't tend to get sunburned the way the bell peppers do. You can see I also have some nice bell peppers in here. And if you see that, see this mark right here, that's sunburn from that bell pepper. And so no matter what I tend to do, and I do put some shade cloth on my bell peppers, they tend to get sunburned. Here's another one down here. This is, the variety is called Bullnose. It was one of the varieties grown in Monticello by Thomas Jefferson. So it's a very, very old heirloom variety. And you can see the sunburn here on this side. I just cut this part off and then chop and freeze these. But that's the other reason that I've moved to the more bullhorn style pepper, because they tend to not have nearly the problem. There's another beautiful one right in there. Not have nearly the problem with sunburn. I have frozen, at this point, chopped and frozen 3 gallons of peppers out of this little pepper bed for a total of 12 plants. And most of that has been, wow, this nasturtium is really going to town in here. I hadn't realized it had climbed all the way up into this pepper. 12 plants, and actually most of those were this variety. Let me see if I can get, yeah, there we go. This variety, which is a Cubanelle. And I like these better if I'm gonna eat a green pepper. I like the flavor of these better. And a lot of them had turned color. You can see they turn red when they're ripe. And so we did a bunch of chopped, mixed Cubanelle and Carmen. And so that was most of that 3 gallon. I haven't really harvested a whole lot off of the bell peppers. The other reason I like the Carmen, I think they're way more productive in terms of actual volume of pepper that you get. The eggplants are almost done, but I am getting a second wave here. And I have 2 different varieties in here. There's one called Little Finger. It's climbed way out of the bed at this point. And Little Finger, you can see why it's called Little Finger, because I've got lots of, it grows in clusters. And there's an example, nice example of size on that. Here's another one down here that's just slightly bigger. These are a Japanese style pepper, and that's about as big as they get. Those are ready to be picked. And then the other variety is called Rosa Bianca. And Rosa Bianca, I've gotten a very nice harvest off of this. And I'm not sure, I might get 1 or 2 more. There's another one coming. And these are more the traditional rounded style Italian eggplants, but very delicious. I also have in here shishitos, and there's only 2 plants. Shishitos do turn red when they're fully ripe. And at this point, I've just kind of stopped picking them because we have inundated with shishitos and we're pretty much done at this point. Let me see if I can get down in here and show you a little more of this bullhorn bell pepper. I have some zucchini that's also climbing in. So when the sunburn gets really bad, it will actually have an entire hole in the pepper. So not really what you want. But some of these are fully intact. Like this one I don't think there's any damage to that. So I did get a few that are full-sized in there. And there's another one way back in there. So I need to get in here and do a harvest. I really haven't given these guys a whole lot of attention. So that's the pepper bed. You can see I've got a lot of beautiful Carmen still in here that I haven't picked. I mostly picked from the other side. So there's another nice small harvest in there. We're going away for the weekend. And so that'll be nice to bring a bunch of those with us. We're going to a little cabin. This is my wild zucchini. You can see there's one down in there that is ready to pick. This is a Romanesco style zucchini. I absolutely love it, but the plants are monstrous and I need to stop trying to grow them in these raised beds and grow them someplace where they can sprawl because they just get huge. So there's 2, maybe 4 plants total in here, 2 clumps of 2, one of them right in here and then one of them on the far end. And they have grown like all the way out this way. They have grown all the way out that way. I've kept them from growing into the pepper bed. So at this point, they're just insane. And there is a little bit of squash bug damage in here, but not a lot. And one of the reasons I like this variety is because they seem to be pretty squash bug resistant. I'm not finding any eggs here. And for this late in the season, it is almost September. That's amazing because squash bugs are just crazy rampant. Going into the rest of this bed besides the zucchini, there were a couple patty pans in here. There is still one patty pan in here. The other one I tore out because I don't think it was actually a patty pan. I think it was a type of winter squash that was the wrong seed in the wrong pack. And so I just took that one out because it wasn't in a good spot. This was a type of noodle bean or asparagus bean or long bean. They have lots of names. These plants were never happy. They were unhappy the entire time they were growing. I did get a nice little harvest off of them and I was able to try them out and eat them for the first time. And I do really like them. So we would grow them again, but you can see a lot of these have just dried up and there's no actual beans in there. So they died before they had formed beans. And so they kind of pittered out pretty early. Let's come into our insane bean arch here. The other bean that's in here, this is a Scarlet Runner, and I mostly grew it for the beautiful red flowers. I am gonna get a little bit of a harvest off of that, and I think I'm just gonna let them dry on the vine. And then the one on the opposite side, this is an Italian heirloom variety. They call this Romesco when they're this flat bean like this. And these are finally just producing and ready to harvest. I haven't done a harvest off of this yet. So all of my regular beans are done. My noodle beans are done. And these guys are finally just coming on. So very, very, very slow, very long days to harvest. And I haven't eaten them yet, so I don't know how they are. This was a seed that I got from a cousin of mine, and he picked it up when he was in Italy. So just kind of a fun, and you can see like this whole trellis on this side is that bean. And there are a ton of them on there. So huge, huge, huge production eventually. But I think they didn't really love the heat, and so I don't think they set fruit. But honestly, they didn't even start blooming until about 3 weeks ago. So it's taken a really long time. This was the regular bush bean bed. And I had 3 different varieties in here. Maxibel, Provider, and there we go. These beautiful guys. This is Dragon Tongue. Dragon Tongues, I did a second planting, and the Dragon Tongue was the latest to harvest. And they're the only ones that are left. Everything else in here is finished. There's a few scattered in there, but mostly they're done, and I need to just tear all of this out. Bush beans, they don't do an extended harvest. You get 1 or 2 picks off of them, and then they're finished. They're kind of a determinate variety. You can see there's a few in here that I didn't harvest and missed. And honestly, I might just leave those on there and collect seed from them so that I have seed from next year if I don't need this bed. These are soybeans or edamame. And I've done 1 harvest off of here, and they really are delicious. This is about the size that you want them to be when they're ready to pick, so they start getting a little bit fat if they're really fat, then they're too far gone and they start getting a little bit starchy. And so there's a trick to when you pick those. But that's been a really nice harvest, and they were great, and I froze some. And then the rest of this bed is just herbs, and I really just need to harvest, and I don't know, I just haven't had time. I've been too busy with too many other things. This is a summer savory, kind of like thyme and rosemary had a baby, and I use it in some of my herbs de Provence mix. And I'm just gonna literally just cut this completely to the ground because it's an annual and it's gonna be about done, and dry that entire thing. This is toothache plant, also called buzz buttons. And they have a very interesting fizzy kind of pop rocky flavor when you put them in your mouth. It's really unusual and a little bit of numbing, kind of similar to Sichuan peppercorns. I have picked and dried a bunch on this. And so that's been kind of a fun little project. And they are really super productive. Like, I can't believe how many flowers I have gotten off of this once they finally started producing. And this is kind of the second wave because I picked pretty much everything that was ready the first time around. A little bit of anise hyssop that also needs to be harvested and dried. But right now is just feeding a lot of pollinators, which is lovely. And then a little bit of a flower pot down here on the end that is still going. So I've got nasturtiums in there and marigolds, and they have just been cranking for the past 3 months, so they're doing great. It's amazing. This bed was red seed poppy, and those are done, and I've harvested those and pulled them out. And then on the end there is some lemon verbena, and that's another one that I'm literally just going to cut to the ground. It is a perennial, but not in our climate. It won't survive the winter, and so I'm just going to cut that down and dry the entire thing. And then this was beets. All of the beets have now been harvested, and I'm playing around with drying some beets and then grinding them and mixing them into a greens powder so that I have a greens powder that I can add to smoothies in the winter. So that's been kind of a fun project. And then, of course, my carrot bed here, I've got a little bit of powdery mildew. You can see the color on this, just from the density and the airflow, lack of airflow in there. But honestly, it's not hurting anything, and the carrots are ready. The carrots are definitely fully mature. You can kind of see what's happening down in there. Let's pull one. This one's going to be a little bit smaller, I think. But there's a carrot. But these will hold well in the ground as long as the insects don't get to them. And so I haven't been in any huge hurry to pull these out. See how the end of that is rounded? That is specific to this particular variety. I like the Nancis type carrots. They're sweeter, in my opinion, and they often have that rounded end, and that's an indication that they're done growing, so they don't just keep getting longer and longer and longer. And then I have a little bit of a pop bean in here that's a type of garbanzo. This is the last of the 3 plants that were in there that was still hanging on. The other 2 have finished maturing and have dried, and so I've harvested those and pulled off the pods. But this one is still had a little ways to go, so I just left it in there. Here's more of that crazy zucchini from that other bed that has climbed all the way out into this aisle. And I've actually cut it off from climbing into the middle of the bed itself multiple times. So I've pruned it back on occasion, and it's still just growing and going and going and going. It's crazy. And at this point, you know, it's September. I'm kind of over zucchini. So it's definitely probably about time for that to go. I do have some okra in here. This okra hasn't done super well just because it's been really shaded out by this oversized zucchini. So it was misguided to put it in here with so many other things. There's 3 different varieties. This one, unfortunately, has just kind of gotten completely lost. There is one right there, but it's gotten buried by the other zucchini. And then I've got a couple of different varieties here as well. I have done a handful of harvesting. I need to pull these off, and I'm just chopping and freezing them, and I'll use them in jambalaya later in the season. Oh, hello. We have a bee climbing into this scarlet runner bean. And again, that was the main reason that I grew those, was just to feed the pollinators and for the beauty. Here, let's just pan up so you guys can see how pretty that is. And this has been blooming now, probably going on at least 2 months, maybe 3. I'll have to go back and look at the other videos. So this has been blooming for a very long time. So once you get them going, they're pretty awesome. I'll show you the beans. I always call this Jack and the Beanstalk beans because the beans themselves in this variety are huge and purple and really pretty. Here, let me see if I can. So these aren't fully mature, but can you see that color, that pink? These will turn purple when they're completely dry. And so I think they're awesome for little kids. It's a great project to do with kids if you've got kids, because the beans are big, they're really easy to handle. They feel like magical beans because they're big and purple. And then you can plant those and then get all the different harvests from eating them as a green bean. You can eat them at this stage, or you can let them dry and eat them as a dried bean. So they're really a versatile bean and a lot of fun to grow. And then moving down here, this is the overgrown herb bed. In the very far end of this, I have celery, and I've done a little bit of harvest out of there, but not a lot. And again, very much getting encroached on by this zucchini plant. And so I really need to pull that out of there. My goal for this celery is to pull it out, chop it, and freeze it, and then have celery. And what I'm gonna do is kind of a mirepoix. So I'm gonna chop onions, celery, and carrots and put them together in the same bag in portion sizes. So basically get like a meal prep, so that when I'm getting ready to do a soup or a stew that calls for that, which is typically 2 parts onion, 1 part carrot, 1 part celery, I'm just gonna have frozen bags of that ready to go, and I can just pull them out. I don't know why I have never done that. I have been making mirepoix for recipes for over 20 years, and it's never occurred to me to freeze all of those things together. So that's gonna be fun. There's some cilantro in there that has gone to seed and is pretty small. I've got lots and lots of other cilantro in the other garden, so I could just come in there and pull that out. Some Tulsi that is feeding all the pollinators right now. Some Thai basil. I don't know if you can see this little bee bopping around. That's also mostly feeding the pollinators. I love the smell of Thai basil. This is one that I just, basically I'm here for the aromatherapy. And then regular sweet basil as well. And the bees are in there right now, just nectaring, which is lovely. I've done quite a bit of harvest off of this basil, and then I've just let it go. In between the basil and this parsley, I did have some marjoram and some za'atar, and it is just completely died because it got overshadowed by everything else that was in there. I didn't really need it, and I shouldn't have put it on the in between these two plants that were going to get so big. So live and learn. Next year I will do better. Let me show you where this zucchini has gone on this side. So the actual original plant is down in here, and it's gone all the way out, and it's all the way over here. So yeah, it's climbing across the universe at this point. Insane. Very, very enthusiastic plant. But I have harvested probably a minimum of 100 zucchini off of this plant. And some of them have just gotten too big, and I've thrown them to the chickens. I've eaten a lot of it. I've frozen a lot of it. I've sold a lot of it. So it is a very, very productive variety. In this final bed, we have, this was the kale and chard. I did have two big Russian kales that I cut out. They were starting to get full of aphids. They have a very kind of wavy texture, and the aphids just love them. The lacinato kale or the dinosaur kale are still in here, and so I can still do some harvesting off of this. I will probably do one more harvest off of this and just chop and blanch and freeze it. I've also been drying it for those same green smoothies that I was mentioning. For whatever reason, this does not get as many aphids in it as the red Russian kale does, which is good. And then we have some Swiss chard in here. I've also been drying that for greens. Still getting some damage here. This could be grasshopper. We're seeing a lot of grasshoppers. It's probably also slugs. I still have slugs. And then there is one red Russian kale. That's this. that is still in here. I'm seeing a little bit of powdery mildew on it. It's kind of pretty much at the end of its game here. And so the kale is about done. If I was really smart, I would start new kale plants about the time I start some of my brassicas in July, and then have a fall crop that was a lot more healthy. They do keep producing, but they tend to get pretty trashed by the time you get to this part of the season. There is also in the middle of that bed a collard. And the collard, it's got some aphids in it too. I just haven't sprayed. I don't eat a lot of collard greens. It's a winter thing for sure, but I might just leave that in there because they tend to overwinter pretty well. And it's nice to have a little bit of winter greens. This is more patty pan squash. Since I didn't have a lot of them in that other bed and they were getting overcrowded, I put a couple in here, and you can see I've got some nice patty pans. There's one back in there. Not sure if you guys can see that hiding. And it's spilling out. And again, surprisingly, not a lot of squash bugs, which surprises me because I did have squash in here last year, and I honestly expected way more squash bugs in here this year. So I'm not sure why we're not having a big squash bug issue this year, but I will take it because they are evil. Here we go. Let me get you down in here where you can really see. So there's some nice patty pans still coming in. And patty pan and zucchini, you need to check them every day. Like, they just get really big really fast. Although now that our temperatures are dropping, that's gonna slow things way down. So, but I've harvested a ton off of this. This was originally early in the spring. I had peas along here, and at this point the trellis has kind of gotten pushed out. And then this is some onion that I had overwintered storage onion from last year, and it was starting to sprout, and so I decided I was just going to plant it and let it go to seed. This is what onion looks like when it goes to seed. At this point, these are dry. They're starting to fall. I need to harvest this, but there's some of our onion seed ready to harvest for planting for next spring. So, and those are ready to come out, and I need to just pull that, and then I can pull this trellis and probably put in some more peas probably in the next day or so. The green stalk, which was strawberries on the bottom and nasturtiums mostly, and some sweet peas on the top. The sweet peas have not bloomed. They're still alive, and so I'm hoping that with the temperature drop, you can see them here. Oh, and this one's starting to wrap around that. I have to turn this stand about every 3 or 4 days, and so anything that's tying itself to this trellis is not going to be happy. This is on here because I figured out that little brown dog over there, Charlie, was eating all the ripe strawberries, and so I had to put a fence around it to keep him out of there. At this point, I could take this down because they're not producing any more strawberries. The strawberries are pretty much done. But yeah, so I'm still hoping that I'm gonna get a bloom off of these sweet peas before it freezes. I put them in really late, and so normally they would bloom in the spring, but we'll see what happens. Maybe, fingers crossed. It's not hurting anything. I just water it once a day in the top. So let me take you guys around. The one other thing I really wanted to show you out here, well, a couple of fun things. This is an almond tree, and we're right on the edge of climate for being able to do almonds. And so this tree, I've had this tree in the ground for about 8 years. It's bloomed almost every year, but I never get an almond set on it because they're starting to open because the frost gets them before they set almonds. This is the first year of all the time I've had this where I'm actually getting actual almonds. Like that. So almonds grow the same way a walnut does, where there's an outer husk and then there's an inner seed. Yeah, this is not quite all the way dry yet. So it's dry on one side, still a little bit green on the other. And then you guys have seen almonds in the shell, so you know what that looks like. So I'm hoping that I'm actually gonna get a few almonds this year. This is kind of exciting. So yeah, we'll see what happens, but this is the first time in all the time I've had this tree that I'm getting some almonds. I have a second one over here, and so this one has got a lot of fruit on it as well. I have a virgin's bower, which is a wild native clematis that is in this tree. It's not planted in the tree, it's planted next to it, but it has climbed up through this, and we're gonna have to get in there and just rip all of that out. It was not the right place to put that. It's actually planted right there. But it's been fun because it's done this little arch. And so we have this kind of natural arch trellis going into the garden with these really fun, fluffy, wild clematis. And so it feels very fairy-like. It's been really fun. I've really enjoyed having this here, but yeah, it's taking over the planet. We're gonna need to tear it out. I wanted to show you in the greenhouse. This time of year in the greenhouse, I have shade cloth. Let me come around so I can show you guys. So I have shade cloth on this greenhouse. This is a 70% shade cloth. So I am really trying to drop the temperature in there. I'll show you this since we're standing here. These are 4 o'clocks. And I can't remember the name of the variety. I'll put it up on the screen. It has some variegation to it, but this patch of 4 o'clocks, this has entirely been reseeded from the previous year. So I planted them there the previous year, and all of these were volunteers. So that's just been really fun. I have a random assortment of things around this greenhouse that are in pots that I water. But in the summer, we put the shade cloth on this greenhouse, and this becomes where I dry my onions. And so this is tropia. So these are the tropia onions. I call them torpedo onions that we harvested. This is cipollini. And so this squat kind of shape is typical of this heirloom variety from Italy. So those are cipollinis that are drying. And then everything up top here, this is all of my shallots. So I got I've harvested all of the shallots, and so the shallots are all drying up there. And then on this side, I have yellow storage onions, and they vary in size. And this is from some experimental breeding that I did where I was looking for an open pollinated variety of onion that I could grow and save seeds from. And so that's what that is. And then I have a red storage onion as well. Last year, my red storage onion did much, much better than my yellow storage onion. And so almost all of my storage onions were red. If you guys have watched some of my cooking videos, you've seen me use about 1 million red onions. But these are in here drying as well. I need the temperature to be dropped in here in order to do this. Otherwise, it's literally easily 120 degrees on a sunny day, if not higher than that. And it will just cook these onions if it's not under some shade cloth. So the shade cloth is really kind of critical. I do have a min-max thermometer in here where I can reset this by pushing this little button, and it will drop that little line back down to, so currently it is about 78 degrees in here, and we've had a low of 50, and then the high is up into the hundreds, just because it is still a greenhouse, even with the vents open and the shade cloth on and the door open at all times. So, but I wanted to show you storage onions. Not all of them have been harvested, but a lot of them have been harvested. So this is coming to fruition from that video that I did way back in the spring on how to plant or how to start onions from seed and why you should. And very few of these are doubles. And so when you get ones that are, the bulb is split into two, they don't store well. And that was the whole reason I stopped growing onions from sets or from plants, because I kept getting tons and tons of split bulbs. And so I really like growing onions from seed. My goal on the storage onions is to have a total of 100. I like to have at least 50 yellow and 50 red. And that way I can use 2 onions a week for a full year and have enough onions to get me through the whole season without having to buy onions from the grocery store. So yeah, onions. So that's the end of this part of the tour, and part 2 will be the big garden. Let's go see what's happening out there.